Chapter 16 of the Case of Jennie Brice. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Case of Jennie Brice by Mary Roberts Reinhardt. Chapter 16. Mr. Holcomb was up very early the next morning. I heard him moving around at 5 o'clock, and at 6 he banged at my door and demanded to know what time the neighborhood rose. He had been up for an hour and there were no signs of life. He was more cheerful after he had had a cup of coffee, commented on Lida's beauty, and said that Howell was a lucky chap. "That is what worries me, Mr. Holcomb," I said. "I am helping the affair along, and what if it turns out badly?" He looked at me over his glasses. "It isn't likely to turn out badly," he said. "I have never married, Mrs. Pitman, and I've missed a great deal out of life." "Perhaps you're better off. If you had married and lost your wife—" I was thinking of Mr. Pitman. "Not at all," he said with emphasis. "It's better to have married and lost than never to have married at all. Every man needs a good woman, and it doesn't matter how old he is. The older he is, the more he needs her. I am nearly 60. I was rather startled, and I almost dropped the fried potatoes. But the next moment he had got out his notebook and was going over the items again. "Pillow slip," he said. "Knife, broken. Onyx clock. Wouldn't think so much of the clock if he hadn't been so damnably anxious to hide the key." The discrepancy in time as revealed by the trial. "Yes, it is as clear as a bell. Mrs. Pitman, does that McGuire woman next door sleep all day?" "She's up now," I said, looking out the window. He was in the hall in a moment, only to come to the door later, hat in hand. "Is she the only other woman on the street who keeps boarders?" "She's the only woman who doesn't," I snapped. "She'll keep anything that doesn't belong to her, except boarders." "Ah!" He lighted his corncob pipe and stood puffing at it and watching me. He made me uneasy. I thought he was going to continue the subject of every man needing a wife, and I'm afraid I had already decided to take him if he offered, and to put the school teacher out and have a real parlor again, but to keep Mr. Reynolds, he being tidy and no bother. But when he spoke, he was back to the crime again. "Did you ever work a typewriter?" he asked. What with the surprise, I was a little sharp. "I don't play any instrument except an egg beater," I replied shortly, and went on clearing the table. "I wonder, do you remember about the village idiot and the horse?" "But of course you do, Mrs. Pitman. You are a woman of imagination. Don't you think you could be Alice Murray for a few moments? Now think, you are a stenographer with theatrical ambitions. You meet an actor and you fall in love with him, and he with you. That's hard to imagine, that last." "Not so hard," he said gently. "Now the actor is going to put you on the stage, perhaps in this new play, and some day he is going to marry you." "Is that what he promised the girl?" "According to some letters her mother found, yes. The actor is married, but he tells you he will divorce the wife. You are to wait for him, and in the meantime he wants you near him, away from the office, where other men are apt to come in with letters to be typed and to chaff you. You are a pretty girl." "It isn't necessary to overwork my imagination," I said with a little bitterness. I had been a pretty girl, but work and worry. "Now you are going to New York very soon, and in the meantime you have cut yourself off from all your people. You have no one but this man. What would you do? Where would you go?" "How old was the girl?" 19. "I think," I said slowly, "that if I were 19 and in love with a man and hiding, I would hide as near him as possible. I'd be likely to get a window that could see his going out and coming in, a place so near that he could come often to see me." "Bravo!" he exclaimed. "Of course, with your present wisdom and experience, you would do nothing so foolish. But this girl was in her teens. She was not very far away, for we probably saw her that Sunday afternoon when he was out for 2 hours. And as the going was slow that day, and he had much to tell and explain, I figure she was not far off. Probably in this very neighborhood." During the remainder of that morning, I saw Mr. Holcombe at intervals, going from house to house along Union Street, making short excursions into side thoroughfares, coming back again and taking up his doorbell ringing with unflagging energy. I watched him off and on for 2 hours. At the end of that time, he came back flushed and excited. "I found the house," he said, wiping his glasses. "She was there all right. Not so close as we had thought, but as close as she could get." "And can you trace her?" I asked. His face changed and saddened. "Poor child," he said. "She is dead, Mrs. Pitman." "Not she! So weakly!" "No," he said patiently. "That was Jennie Brice." "But Mr. Howell is a young ass," he said with irritation. "He did not take Jennie Brice out of the city that morning. He took Alice Murray in Jennie Brice's clothing and veiled." Well, that is 5 years ago. 5 times since then the Allegheny River, from being a mild and inoffensive stream, carrying a few boats and a great deal of sewage, has become a raging destroyer, and has filled our hearts with fear and our cellars with mud. 5 times since then Molly Maguire has appropriated all that the flood carried from my premises to hers, and 5 times have I lifted my carpets and moved Mr. Holcombe, who occupies the parlor bedroom, to a second-floor room. A few days ago, as I said at the beginning, we found Peter's body floating in the cellar, and as soon as the yard was dry, I buried him. He had grown fat and lazy, but I shall miss him. Yesterday, a riverman fell off a barge along the waterfront and was drowned. They dragged the river for his body, but they did not find him. But they found something, an onyx clock, with the tattered remnant of a muslin pillow slip wrapped around it. It only bore out the story as we had known it for 5 years. The Murray girl had lived long enough to make a statement with the police, although Mr. Holcombe only learned this later. On the statement being shown to Ladley in the jail, and his learning of the girl's death, he collapsed. He confessed before he was hanged, and his confession, briefly, was like this. He had met the Murray girl in connection with the typing of his play, and had fallen in love with her. He had never cared for his wife, and would have been glad to get rid of her in any way possible. He had not intended to kill her, however. He had planned to elope with the Murray girl, and awaiting an opportunity, had persuaded her to leave home and to take a room near my house. Here he visited her daily, while his wife was at the theater. They had planned to go to New York together on Monday, March the 5th. On Sunday, the 4th, however, Mr. Bronson and Mr. Howell had made their curious proposition. When he accepted, Philip Ladley maintained that he meant only to carry out the plan as suggested, but the temptation was too strong for him. That night, while his wife slept, he had strangled her. I believe he was frantic with fear after he had done it. Then it occurred to him that if he made the body unrecognizable, he would be safe enough. On that quiet Sunday night, when Mr. Reynolds reported all peaceful in the Ladley room, he had cut off the poor wretch's head and had tied it up in a pillow slip weighed with my onyx clock. It is a curious fact about the case that the scar which his wife incurred to enable her to marry him was the means of his undoing. He insisted, and I believe he was telling the truth, that he did not know of the scar. That is, his wife had never told him of it, and had been able to conceal it. He thought she had probably used paraffin in some way. In his final statement, written with great care and no little literary finish, he told the story in detail, of arranging